Bobby Dassey just said he overheard a murder confession. And then the jury was out. The courtroom became a verbal battlefield. And the defense is trying to figure out, what do we do now? Because we just found out something where another witness said something entirely different. How do we respond to this? Hello and welcome to Beach House 34's deep dive into the Steven Avery trial. We are now on episode 12. And last episode, we heard from Bobby Dassey. This was the state's, golden boy witness, a person who was supposed to, say that, hey, look, I heard Steven Avery say this, and, this just admits to murder, right? And out of nowhere, the court and the defense really seemed prepared for what Bobby had to say. And this wasn't some small detail. This was a huge claim, right? Coming from Steven's own nephew. This actually sent everybody kind of scrambling. I mean, the prosecution, they got finished with their questioning. The defense asked for a break. They had a long lunch break to try and figure out what to do about this. And then this episode begins after they have come back from that lunch, after the defense has sat there trying to figure out, okay, what are we supposed to do about what Bobby just said? That's how this episode starts out. And real quick, before we jump in, if you've been following the series and you want to support the work that goes into it, I've got a really simple way for you to do that. You can leave a one-time tip. It's like a little tip jar at ko-fi.com/beachhouse34. It's ko-fi.com/beachhouse34. And lastly, promise, this is the last thing. In many of these episodes, I know many of you listen and are enjoying listening. I appreciate that so much. I hear from so many of you. If you actually want to see, I do have quite a few of the exhibits that they reference here in these episodes. If you actually want to see these exhibits, you can actually listen and watch at the same time over at YouTube. It's at youtube.com/beachhouse34. And the Avery trial has its own playlist. So it'll be really easy to start at episode 1 and go all the way through just to where we are right now. So with that said, let's get on with this episode. So what we're doing right now is we are picking up right after the noon recess was taken. All this stuff happened with Bobby in episode 11. The defense needed to have some time to go over some documents and talk and so forth. So they did this over lunch. They were given extra time. And now they are back. And in the transcript, it says, after the noon recess, the following proceedings resumed in the courtroom outside the presence of the jury. The court says, you may be seated. At this time, we're back on the record outside of the presence of the jury. I will indicate for the record that I met with counsel briefly in chambers before we began. It's my understanding, I believe that we have an agreement on how we are going to proceed this afternoon. And that involves, specifically, taking a witness out of order. Is that correct, counsel? Mr. Kratz, the prosecutor, says, the state understands, Your Honor, that the defense has asked for an opportunity to defer its cross-examination of Bobby Dassey until the beginning of court tomorrow. We understand that the defense wishes an opportunity to interview Mr. Dassey sometime yet this afternoon, and the state is prepared to call Trooper Austin and have him present his testimony before the cross-examination begins, which, as I understand, the defense has asked for leave to commence that tomorrow morning. The court says Mr. Strang. And Mr. Strang, one of the defense attorneys, said, I had suggested in chambers that our conclusion and the defense's statement was that we did need to interview Bobby Dassey before cross-examining him, and that we wished to cross-examine him only once, so as not to draw undue attention to him or to any part of his testimony. Because that is an interview that is of unpredictable length and will take us in different possible directions, some of which I can predict as possibilities, and I'm not sure I can predict all of the possibilities. I had asked that we have the balance of the day to do that, and that we start tomorrow morning with the cross-examination of Bobby Dassey, so that for the jury, this just flows sequentially. And, the fact that the court had to resolve some issues is all the jury would know. In Chambers, as I understood the court, it was unwilling to adjourn for the afternoon and start up again tomorrow morning. I object to taking another witness out of order because I expect that, as I understand this trial, then Bobby Dassey will be the only witness whose cross-examination did not immediately follow in order with his direct examination. That is, it was broken up by another witness. The court, of course, controls the mode and the order of the interrogation of the witnesses, but this does tend to highlight him. And also, it leaves us attending to Trooper Austin, which that time probably would better be used and should be used in interviewing Bobby Dassey and adjusting the cross-examination of Bobby Dassey. Accordingly, doing a 1.5 or 1 hour witness is better than having no time to interview Bobby Dassey at all, to be sure. But I don't think this is an adequate remedy. And as I forecasted in Chambers and won't repeat here, there are a number of possible issues that we may need to visit or revisit depending on the results of the conversation with Bobby Dassey. But in any event, I do ask the court then to exempt us or to carve an exception for Mr. Buting and myself and our defense investigator this afternoon so that we can talk to Bobby Dassey here during the midst of his testimony, so to speak. But we would ask that the court's earlier order remain in place for agents of the state other than Miss Leverins, who, of course, as a practical matter, has to have some communication with Bobby Dassey about the court's schedule and plans. Mr. Kratz. Thank you, Judge. As the court know, in Chambers, it was the state's request that the defense proceed directly with cross-examination. I will have an exhibit marked for the court, which I alerted the court and reminded counsel that they already had in their possession. Pages 516 and 517 of the Sheriff's Department discovery, which is now a second place within the material that Mr. Strang already had, which alerted the defense counsel to the substance of and the surrounding circumstances of the interview that Mr. Dassey mentioned in his direct testimony. To suggest to this court at this time that it was not until this very moment that the defense realized the significance of Bobby Dassey, when they have known for well over a year that Bobby Dassey was the last person, other than their client, to see Miss Halbach alive and walking toward Mr. Avery's trailer, to suggest it's only now that they believe it's important to interview Mr. Dassey, the state believes to be disingenuous. That notwithstanding, Your Honor, we understand why the defense has made this request. We do disagree that after Mr. Strang and Mr. Buting have an opportunity to interview Mr. Dassey, that the state should somehow be prohibited or precluded from ourselves interviewing or speaking with Mr. Dassey. That is a separate issue, of course. And with that exhibit now having been provided to the court, we don't believe that we have any further need to make any further record on this issue. Thank you, Judge. Mr. Strang then says, I acknowledge that I have had in my possession pages 516 and 517 of the Calumet County Sheriff's Department report. It's not well over a year, of course, because Mr. Buting and I have first entered our appearances less than a year ago in this case. But we have had that report and those 2 pages for months. And in any event, I wish that the question of the interviewing of Bobby Dassey were as easy as whether he is important or not. That is not the question. There are a whole lot of other dynamics at work here, such as the availability of witnesses and the allocation of resources and some of those things. We don't need to rehash all of the arguments about why the defense had wanted a trial date later than February 5th, 2007. But it's not all that easy. I can say, and should say, that we have not interviewed Bobby Dassey at any time, and we hope to be able to do that today. And the issue, in the end, I think under Section 971.23 1B, comes down to the meaning of witness. and whether here we were provided notice by the state that Bobby Dassey will be a witness to testify to the oral statement at issue, materially different as it is from Mr. Osmundson's rendition, and some differences from the secondhand rendition from another witness in pages 516 and 517. In just recounting to a law enforcement agent what Bobby Dassey supposedly said to him about what Steven Avery said in Bobby Dassey's presence. So I think we have got a record. I have made and I will renew the mistrial motion and the request for lesser relief, with the least favored alternative being given the afternoon here to attend just to Bobby Dassey and resuming the trial with the jury tomorrow morning with Bobby Dassey's cross-examination. I understand the court has ruled on that. I just wanted to make our position clear. The court says, all right. First of all, the court has already denied the motion for a mistrial, and I have heard nothing to make me change that. Since the matter was brought up on the record this morning, the state has presented the court with another piece of discovery, which makes reference a little more directly to the statement that was the subject of the defense motion here. Given the fact, nevertheless, that the witness himself in his own statements apparently did not make reference to the information contained in the other two documents that highlighted the witness's exposure to this alleged statement on the part of the defendant, I agree that the defendant should be permitted some time to explore this issue and to interview the witness. I have not been presented a reason why such an interview should require hours of preparation, since the defense has had the opportunity to interview this witness for as long as this case has been pending. There is only one narrow issue, specifically the witness's testimony as to one statement on the part of the defendant that gives rise to the need for another interview. I'm confident if we break a little earlier today and the defense has an opportunity to interview the witness, that should be sufficient to address any problem that may exist. I do agree under these circumstances that the defense should have the right to interview Mr. Dassey first. But under the circumstances, I see no reason to prohibit any representative of the state from interviewing Mr. Dassey later. Again, for those reasons that have been stated earlier, we are talking about one fairly narrow statement here that is referenced in at least two different spots in the discovery that was admittedly provided to the defense. I think the remedy the court has ordered should be sufficient to address this issue. Likewise, I don't believe the court will simply inform the jury for the convenience of the parties and the witnesses we are going to hear from Officer Austin, and the cross-examination of Mr. Dassey will be completed tomorrow morning. That happens on a fairly routine basis in many trials for a variety of reasons, and the court has never known that to be something that is likely to influence the jury in any way. So at this time, we will bring the jurors back in. Then, Mr. Kratz, you can call your witness. Mr. Kratz says thank you. And the court says, what was the exhibit number of pages 516 and 517? The clerk says, Exhibit 89. The court says, okay. Mr. Strang then says, don't we have another issue? And the court says, there is another issue that I will take up tomorrow morning. I don't believe it was required to be taken up now. Mr. Strang says, okay. And Mr. Kratz then says, Judge, regarding Mr. Austin, I told the court that Mr. Austin intends to explain his process through a PowerPoint demonstration, which, after we're concluded, I will mark and make part of the record. I do have a hard copy for the court to follow along. I have provided Mr. Buting and Mr. Strang with a copy as well, so they can follow along. And finally, as I alerted the court, later in this trial, some of these computer images may be, in fact, referred to in a small subset of these images. I also have some 4x6 images made to complete the record. I will provide those and have those marked as well to be identified by this witness at the conclusion of his testimony. But I will give the court and the clerk the exhibits here, and the court can follow along with the PowerPoint demonstration as well. We are prepared to proceed then. All right, so as you know, I do not read ahead on these transcripts, and I had no idea that this was going to happen. I, too, was looking very much forward to the defense's questioning of Bobby Dassey, but it doesn't seem like that's going to happen right now. So let me kind of break this down as to what just happened. It's right after the lunch break. Bobby Dassey earlier had dropped this bombshell, something that nobody was expecting him to say. So the defense needed some time to regroup and to go over these documents and figure out how to respond to this. The judge gave them a little extra time over lunch to go over this stuff, and now they're back in court, but there's no jury at this point. The judge says that he has talked to the attorneys privately in chambers and that there's kind of an agreement. The defense wants to delay their cross-examination of Bobby Dassey until the next morning. Now, why do they want to do this? Because they haven't had a chance to sit down and properly interview him. They're saying they only want to cross-examine him once instead of doing it in pieces, which could draw extra attention to what he said, which I agree. I mean, that makes sense. They just want to be thorough and keep things clean for the jury. But the prosecution, Kratz, is like, oh, wait, hold up. The defense has had those statements from Bobby in their discovery for months. They've known for a long time that he was a key witness. It's not like this is brand new information. So them saying that they just now realized that they need to talk to Bobby, this feels like this feels disingenuous. He also doesn't want the defense getting special access to Bobby without the state being able to talk to him too, which, fair point, right? Then Dean Strang, one of Steven's defense attorneys, pushes back and he says, look, yeah, we've had these pages, but this isn't about whether Bobby himself is important. It's about what just came out on the stand, and it changes the game. There are a ton of moving parts here. Who's available, when we can talk to them, what resources we have. He adds that they've never interviewed Bobby at all, not once. So if they're going to go after him in court, they need time to figure out what the hell just happened. He also formally asks again for a mistrial. Again, yeah. But then says if that is totally off the table, then at the very least, they need to take the rest of the day to interview Bobby before picking things up again in the morning. So the judge then weighs in, okay? And he says, no mistrial, that's not happening. He's already ruled on this. Yes, the defense can interview Bobby that afternoon, but no, the interview doesn't have to take hours. You've had plenty of time. Yes, the prosecution can also talk to Bobby afterward if they want. And no, the jury isn't going to hear about any of this drama. They'll just be told that a different witness, in this case, Trooper Austin, is going to testify right now and that Bobby will be back tomorrow. It's pretty normal stuff, but it shows just how tense things are starting to get. I mean, this is only day 3. Everyone's trying to get control of what's happening and what's being told to the jury. The defense is scrambling to get their hands on Bobby before he gets back on the stand because what he said could either blow up their case or open up a whole new line of attack. And I am really curious. Why didn't they interview Bobby? If they saw him on the witness list, what was the purpose for not even sitting down and talking with him? I mean, obviously they didn't know what he was going to say, but I don't know. That really confuses me too. Kratz then finishes up by prepping the judge for the Trooper Austin's testimony, which is going to include a PowerPoint demonstration. Yeah, I guess that's what they're going to do. He gives everyone copies to follow along with and mentions that some of these images might come back up later. So at this point, the judge says, fine, let's bring the jury back in, and the trial moves forward. But this time we're going to hear from Trooper Austin. We are not going to hear from Bobby Dassey. So let's get into what Trooper Austin has to say. The court then brings the jury back into the courtroom, and the following proceeding continued in the courtroom in the presence of the jury. The court says, you may be seated. Members of the jury, for reasons relating to availability of witnesses, we are going to take a witness out of order at this time. The defense will be conducting its cross-examination of Mr. Dassey tomorrow morning, and the state is going to call another witness at this time. Mr. Kratz? Mr. Kratz says, we will call Trooper Tim Austin at this time. And then he is sworn in, asked to spell his last name, and then the direct examination by Mr. Kratz begins. Mr. Austin, how are you employed? I am employed as a trooper with the Wisconsin State Patrol. I'm assigned to the Wisconsin State Patrol Academy to the Technical Reconstruction Unit. Can you tell us what the Technical Reconstruction Unit is? The Technical Reconstruction Unit is a specialized unit, if you will, of persons that work with crash reconstructions and crime scene reconstructions for the Division of the State Patrol. Could you briefly set forth your education, training, and experience in the areas of scene modeling? Yes, sir. I have been trained and certified as an instructor in the field of forensic diagramming, which includes the use of computer-aided drafting or drawing software and a geodimeter, I believe that's how you say it, geodimeter, which is basically an electronic surveying device for collecting measurements. Now, Trooper Austin, we will be referring to the large screen here in the courtroom. This is what is known as a PowerPoint presentation or PC presentation software. Oh my God, I'm sorry. Does he think that the jury are a group of idiots? Oh my gosh. Let me continue. Could you, first of all, just tell the jury what we will be looking at during your testimony and how this was created? Yes. To assist with my testimony, under the direction of Mr. Kratz, I created a PowerPoint presentation. What you will see is a series of slides that will help to bring us through the forensic mapping project that I did in this particular case. You will see some images in 2 dimensions and some 3-dimensional computer scenes that I generated. All right, what is forensic mapping? Forensic mapping is the science, if you will, of collecting measurements at a crash or crime scene and then putting them together later in either a 2-dimensional diagram or 3-dimensional models. Such was my objective in this particular case, to collect measurements at the given property and later to bring those measurements into the office to create a 2-dimensional diagrams and some 3-dimensional models. Specifically, Trooper Austin, on November 5th of 2005, were you asked to proceed to, and did you, in fact, proceed to a property known as the Avery Salvage Yard? Yes. On November 5th of 2005, I was requested by local law enforcement to go to the Avery property in Manitowoc County for the purpose of forensic mapping. How long were you at that property? The forensic mapping activities went from November 5th through November 12th of that year. You mentioned, I think, earlier that this forensic mapping process requires the taking of measurements. Can you describe that process and how many measurements were involved? Yes. As I said before, we utilized an electronic measuring device in addition to recording some measurements by hand with tape measures, if you will. But the bulk of the measurements were taken using an electronic device known as the geodimeter, geodimeter, or the total station. In total, we documented over 4,100 measurements at the Avery property. Tell us about the total station process, please. Certainly. The total station, as I said before, is an electronic device composed of an electronic distance measuring system, which essentially measures distance from the total station to a given evidentiary point. It also has a theodolite, which measures angles. It also has a data collector and a prism. Just for the record, and for the reporter's benefit, a hard copy of this will be provided for the spellings of everything you said. This is a picture of the geodimeter. Is that correct? Yes. And those other devices that are used to create these measurements are included within the total station package itself. Is that correct? Yes, that is correct. Hence the name total station. It measures not just angles, like a transit would. It also measures distance, and that is because we have a theodolite and a distance measuring system in there. We have a total package, or hence a total station. I find it ironic that Kratz had to explain a PowerPoint presentation, but his witness is using all of these words that barely anybody knows, and yet it seems to be okay. Although he is offering them, I guess, some kind of paperwork that explains or at least shows them the spelling of these words, right? Let's continue. And the questioning continues. I'm sure Mr. Pletkowski would like you to slow down just a little more. That would be terrific. Can you tell us about the information storage and retrieval? Certainly. Again, what the total station does is measures the distance and angles to a particular location. For example, if I were measuring an item of evidentiary value where Mr. Kratz is, I would ask him to hold the prism over that item of evidentiary value. The total station would recognize the angle to Mr. Kratz both horizontally and vertically. It would then measure the distance. What it will document is that particular point's location in 3D space. In other words, along an x-axis, a y-axis, and a z-axis, based on where the total station is located. If there is another point on the other side of the courtroom, it would do the same thing, distance and angle to that particular point. It stores that data in an onboard data collector, which you see in the lower pictures. Is that basically a computer? Yes, it is, and it does convert these horizontal and vertical angles to x, y, and z coordinates for later retrieval. All right, let's talk about the total station's accuracy. Can you tell the jury just how accurate is this process? This particular total station has a maximum angular error or induced error from instruments of 3 seconds. So what that means, as I said before, it measures in angles. If I take a circle, that circle is divided into 360 degrees. Each degree is divided into 60 minutes. Each minute is divided into 60 seconds. So this particular instrument is accurate to within 3 of those seconds. Mr. Kratz, at this particular scene, the longest shot distance was about 1,200 feet. If I calculate it out mathematically, that means our maximum error induced by the instrument is less than a ½ inch. All right, let's talk about the location, the Avery salvage property itself. I have put your next slide on the screen, and feel free to use the laser pointer or whatever you may need to explain or describe for the jury, please, the mapping locations. In this slide, I put an aerial photograph of the Avery property. The purpose of this was to show that we had actually forensically mapped out this entire location. That is, everything that you see here on the screen was mapped out using that geodimeter total station. This second slide, Mr. Kratz shows us a different view, another aerial photograph of the same property. This time we have changed it. So north is to the left side of the screen, and in the box is where it shows the Avery salvage property. That map was created, and I put the slide up because in addition to mapping the Avery salvage property, we also completed some forensic mapping at what is best described as the deer camp. I was not privy as to who owns the deer camp. I know it's an unrelated person. We did forensic mapping at this location too, and also a cul-de-sac at the end of Cuss Road. The areas we mapped were somewhat considerable in terms of geographic location, if you will. Are you familiar with a term called CAD drawing? And that's CAD. And he answers, yes, sir. From a two-dimensional standpoint, describe that for the jury, please. What Mr. Kratz is referring to as CAD is computer-aided drawing. In addition, we are doing all of our diagramming on the computer, and we refer to two-dimensional drawings. What that is an orthogonal view, meaning looking from the top straight down. That is how most of the Avery property was diagrammed, so that when you look at the computer drawing, it's essentially as if you were way above that scene, looking straight down at it. What that allows you to do is take specific locations and zoom in on it, if you will, to look at these locations in detail. Let's look at some of the two-dimensional drawings. What are we looking at now? Mr. Kratz then also says, by the way, Judge, as we go through this, I will refer to the hard copy. This will be the bottom of page 7, just so the record is clear, as this witness testifies. And then he continues. Go ahead, Mr. Austin. What we are looking at here is that two-dimensional CAD drawing that was created showing the Avery property that we saw in the aerial photographs. And again, we have the ability to zoom in on specific areas if we wanted to see the details of a different location in that entire overall salvage property. Were you able, with your total station measuring, are you able to tell the jury the perimeter, if you will, in distances? Yes, not directly with the total station, Mr. Kratz. However, once we bring it into the computer environment, we can take measurements to be able to determine the extent of that. In this case here, I want to say the rough measurements because the property is not perfectly square, but north and south, the measurement is approximately 1,260 feet, and east and west, the measurement is approximately 1,300 feet. That comes out to be just under 40 acres. All right, let's talk about some of the two-dimensional views that you created then. This image, again, which would be on the bottom of page 8, is the entire Avery property. Is that correct? Yes, sir. And I will put this image back in here again to show you that we're going to zoom in, if you will, on certain sections on those two-dimensional diagrams. So with this portion of that drawing, we are now going to look at the two-dimensional drawing, which shows the northeastern corner of the property. In that northeastern corner of the property are the business buildings, if you will, for the Avery salvage yard. What we are looking at here, sir, there are blue-colored buildings down here is the main business or main shop. There are also some other storage locations. This would be private residences listed here. Were you also asked to do a two-dimensional view of where Teresa Halbach's vehicle was located? Yes, the scene we were just at was at the northeastern corner. We are now going to go down where you see a yellow box to the southeastern corner of the property. The very first night of forensic mapping, the RAV4 was there. Therefore, we did forensically map its location, and a two-dimensional diagram was generated. And we can zoom in on that area on the two-dimensional diagram to see that location. Then on the top of page 11 now, the screen that the jury is viewing, why don't you tell us what we are looking at? What we are looking at here are details of that southeastern corner of the property. And what we see here is the RAV4 that Mr. Kratz has asked me about, positioned here. Now, we did actually, using the total station, locate pieces of wood or other debris that was leaning up against or on top of the vehicle. That is why you see in this two-dimensional drawing, there are some items on the view of that car. Were you asked to determine the location and the distance between the RAV4 and a fixed object, which is known as a car crusher? Yes. To assist with that, I will pull the aerial photo back on to, again, show that. The RAV4 was located down there in this location, and the vehicle crusher is located where you now see the yellow square. If you look at the CAD drawing of this, we can see where the vehicle crusher is related to the position of the RAV4. Now, if I take a direct, as the crow flies, measurement, if you will, from the RAV4 straight across, and there is a pond area here, but straight across to the vehicle crusher is about 380 feet away. Again, for the jury, when you say about 380 feet away, you can actually tell them within a half inch how far away that is, can't you? If you were to ask me, Mr. Kratz, specific locations, say this spot on the RAV4 to this spot on the crusher, we could get very accurate. I rounded this off to the nearest foot just because I'm taking an approximate position on the RAV4 to an arbitrary position on the vehicle crusher. Were you also asked to do two-dimensional views of the area closer to Steven Avery's residence itself? Yes, sir. Mr. Kratz, if we move from the vehicle crusher here to the northwestern area of the salvage yard, there are two private residences in that area, one belonging to Mr. Avery, and we can, again, on the two-dimensional drawings, zoom in, if you will, on this location to view a scaled scenic representation of that area. On the top of page 14, then, is our first two-dimensional view. Why don't you show us what you are looking at? Again, the northwestern portion of that property, what we are seeing here is a private residence. That would be Mr. Avery's residence. There is a garage next to it, and a little further east is another private residence and garage. I think you may have testified just in passing, but just so the jury understands, were you personally involved in taking all of these measurements? Yes, sir. How many measurements did you take? For the Avery salvage property, there are over 4,100 measurements that were documented. How long were you there? How many days? It would be November 5th through the 12th, about a week. This slide, Mr. Kratz, shows that two-dimensional CAD drawing of the Avery salvage yard, and I have highlighted or labeled, if you will, these areas that we just saw details of: the location of the RAV4 in the southeastern corner, the vehicle crusher, the business office we saw first in the northeastern corner, and in the northwest, this is Mr. Avery's residence. Were you asked to determine some distances for us? Yes, I was asked to determine some general distances. Again, as we saw earlier, these are point-to-point measurements. They do not account for the fact that we could not really walk from the business office to the RAV4. There are some obstructions in here, but if you took a direct measurement, you would see it's about almost 1,100 feet from the RAV4 to the business office. I will just move forward a couple of slides because the last slide, the slide on the bottom of page 16, shows all of those measurements. Why don't you go ahead, Mr. Austin, and tell us what all of those measurements are? Yes, sir. The other measurements I added on here, like the distance from the RAV4 to Mr. Avery's residence, again, straight across the property, is approximately 1,480 feet. The distance back from Mr. Avery's residence to the business office is about 1,100 feet. For the final measurement, what I did is take the driving distance, if you would. If we were to go from Mr. Avery's residence, drive around, and come around from the eastern portion of the property down to the RAV4 location, would be about 2,600 feet of distance. I have to add, Mr. Kratz, this doesn't account for changes in grade. In other words, the Avery property is not just a flat surface. There are some elevations in there. That doesn't account for traveling down a hill or traveling up a hill. So the actual distance might be slightly greater than 2,600 feet. How far is that in miles? Well, a mile is 5,280 feet, so this would be close to a half mile. Now, these two-dimensional views, the charts or the diagrams, if you will, have been used in trials. But you are able, with the software, are you able, with your training and experience, to convert these measurements and to convert these two-dimensional images into more three-dimensional scenes or models? Yes, as I mentioned before, the total station actually records measurements in 3D space. That is, not just our flat X and Y axis, but also a Z axis up and down. So we can come up with the elevations or the height of specific objects, which was done in this case using a different software package. Let's talk about that software. The software package utilized is known as Forensic 3D. It's a computer-aided drawing program. It's powered by a CAD engine called Rhinoceros. It's typically used in the marine industry and the jewelry design industry. What this does is allow a user to actually draw in a 3D space. With the three-dimensional drawings, it allows us to better understand, as I wrote up here, the spatial and geometrical relationships between objects. In other words, we are not just looking straight down. and it's something where we can examine another vantage point or perspective. So the jury understands eventually where we are going. I know I'm fast forwarding and we will get there, but will this allow us to go through an animation, to actually do a tour or walkthrough of various locations? Yes. As we work our way through enough of the slides I have here, we will eventually get to using the software to create an animation or walkthrough, if you will, of the physical scene. All right, let's talk about assigning texture maps. With the software package, the user utilizes a process called texture mapping to create a drawing like the one you see here. What that means is if I create a three-dimensional model from this software, I can apply a texture to that to make it more realistic looking, if you will. In this case, for example, what was done is a photograph was taken of the siding of Mr. Avery's residence. Using that photograph of the siding, it was pasted onto a three-dimensional model so that the actual siding is what you see in this model that was rendered. Now, when we look at things such as grass or wood that was taken from a personal library that I had, if you will, that way I can make something look similar to grass or look similar to wood. But there are certain aspects of this property that the texture mapping was done by using the actual photographs that we had of the siding of the residence, the siding of the garage, the floor in the bathroom, and the floor in the bedroom. All right. What areas were you asked to do three-dimensional modeling in? Although the entire property, again, was forensically mapped, the three-dimensional modeling was done in the northwestern area, as that area is the area of the two residences that we have discussed earlier. The first scene model is from the bottom of page 19. Why don't you walk us through this briefly? What we are looking at here is an overview of the entire area that was done in 3 dimensions. For what we are seeing here, north would be to the bottom of the image. In other words, we are looking to the south. And on the right-hand side, we see Mr. Avery's residence. We see the garage next to that. And we have to talk about these other residences too. Private residences here, and then the garage and the vehicles and the other items that were in place when the forensic mapping was completed. You talked about Mr. Avery's residence, and I think you also mentioned this residence. Do you know what that is? This residence that we are seeing on the left side of the screen, which would be to the east, is the residence of, I believe, Barb Janda and Mr. Dassey. Here we have that previous slide that we showed with a box around that. And next we have essentially zoomed in, if you will, or moved closer to get a close-up view of that Janda Dassey residence. Is this view the front of that residence? Yes, this would be the front of that residence. Again, we are at north looking south. What is nice about using the forensic or three-dimensional models here? We can actually take that and go around to view the backside. We are not limited just to certain views of this location. Let me ask you, Trooper Austin, the advantage, recognizing it's not a photograph, but is the advantage of incident scene mapping that it does allow perspective or views that perhaps the naked eye can't see? Yes, the first part of the question is very important. These are not photographs. These are, again, scene models that were created and compiled based on the measurements taken at the scene. But where they are advantageous, we can change the views and change the perspective. This one, for example, I don't know how high up the camera is in the air, probably somewhere around 50 to 75 feet. But obviously, it's not a view that I could take or obtain from being out there at the scene. What are we looking at now? As I stated before, with these models, we can actually change our location to gain a different perspective. In this case, we moved behind the Janda Dassey residence just to get a good look at the back side of that house, to see the geometric relationships of objects there. We are talking about the Janda property. Were you also asked to do a scene model for the Avery property and what is called the curtilage, the area around it, as well? Yes. Just as we did with the Janda property, we can do the same thing with the Mr. Avery's residence over on the west side. What you are seeing here is another view of the larger model where we are zooming in on Mr. Avery's residence. Just as we did previously, we can move around to the backside to view the spatial relationships there. So again, the advantage is that we can take any particular view or perspective we want to look at it and see that using the three-dimensional models. Now, these are exterior views, that is, on the outside of the property. Were you asked to, in effect, do the same process inside of the buildings? Yes, that is correct. Exterior models were created of Mr. Avery's residence and the garage next to it. It's the same process that I did for the exteriors. Most of the measurements that we talked about were taken inside the residence. What I can do with this software is actually go in closer on that residence, fade in or out, or remove the roof, so that we can see all of the various rooms inside the residence. Again, it's a view that we could not have through normal photographs of the buildings. At the bottom of page 24, the first interior scene model, why don't you tell us what we are looking at? This particular model shows Mr. Avery's residence, and again, what we have done here, the roof was hidden, which allows us to gain a perspective of how the house is laid out, where these various rooms are in relationship to each other, and where some of the main pieces of furniture that were measured are located. Are you able, and can you, in fact, take specific rooms and give us better views of a particular room? Yes. Actually, all of the rooms to the one side I had originally created images showing the interiors of the rooms. For example, in this case, we can look at the back bedroom, which you can see outlined here in yellow. What I'm showing you is the bottom of page 25. Is that the layout or more details of the images of Mr. Avery's master bedroom, or what you called the back bedroom? Yes. However, I wouldn't say more details because it's the same model that we saw before. All we have done is changed our perspective, moved a little closer to see the objects that were placed in the room. It's not necessarily any more detailed. It's just that we have moved to a new perspective. We can now see the spatial relationships of the objects in that location. You said you were asked to do the same interior modeling with the garage. Can you tell us about that? Yes, sir. The exact same process was utilized with the garage. However, these measurements here were also documented using that total station. And when this was mapped, we picked out the main or the larger items that were in the garage to place them into the model. And what you are seeing here is an overview of the garage with the roof removed so we can see what is in that garage. On March 1st and 2nd of 2006, additional information was brought to your attention, and the prosecution then, that is myself, Mr. Gahn, and Mr. Fallon, asked you to include or create some additional images. Is that correct? Yes, that is correct, Mr. Kratz. Additional measurements were recorded by other law enforcement officers in March of 2006, and I was asked to include 2 of those evidentiary items in the scale model. And those items were denoted by what is described as being evidence markers. So to help show those locations using their measurements, I placed the evidence markers in the model so that we can see where the items were positioned. Now, so that the jury understands the later use of these in the coming weeks, this image we are looking at from the bottom of page 27, although not a photograph, does provide, again, a perspective that the naked eye cannot see. Is that correct? And that's correct, Mr. Kratz, because if you recall, a few slides ago, as you showed what was in the garage, there was a Suzuki Samurai in this position, and in the middle, there is a snowmobile in this particular view. That Suzuki Samurai and the snowmobile were removed. That was done by me with the intention of being better able to view the location of these items of evidentiary value. In addition, we see one marked as 23A. Previous to this slide, there was an air compressor over that particular location. To help to be able to see that location better, I hid or turned off, if you will, that air compressor so you don't see it in this particular view. Now, you have made a point before to distinguish between these models and photography. Your next slide attempts to describe that distinction a little bit further. Why don't you go ahead and do that? Yes. Again, as in the previous question from Mr. Kratz, he asked me if these were photographs. They are not photographs. They should not be taken as being photographs. What they are three-dimensional models. All that a photograph is going to show you is the scene as it was observed when the picture was taken. In the models, what you are seeing is a scaled geometric perspective where we can remove the roof, we can hide the air compressor, or gain different views to better see particular items. All right. The next area I would like you to discuss is an area behind the garage of Mr. Avery's. Were you asked to provide some modeling of that? Yes, as we did with the two houses, we can take a particular area. In this case, you see again a yellow box showing an area behind the garage. We can essentially zoom in or change our perspective to see what some of the items are behind that garage. Again, this is an image which is at the bottom of page 29. Do those include observations not only that you made, but measurements that you were involved in taking sometime between the 5th and the 12th of November? Yes, this particular slide shows some items behind Mr. Avery's garage that were based on measurements that were recorded by me or other observations. Now, you said we were able to kind of shift things around to get different perspectives. And the top of page 30 and 31 are examples of that. Is that correct? Yes. What we have done is essentially stayed in the same area, but we have shifted our quote unquote camera, if you will, or our position, so you can gain another perspective or another view of the items located behind the garage. Were you asked, Mr. Austin, to provide the jury with some perspective between the areas behind Mr. Avery's garage and some of the backyard areas of the Janda property? Yes, I actually moved over the location from that area about behind the garage to this area behind the Janda Dassey residence. Again, it was the same thing we have seen before. We can shift our perspective and our view to show this location behind that particular residence. This view here is one that is an elevated view looking to this would be the northwest. And we see not just the area behind the Janda Dassey property, but also Mr. Avery's residence further into the image. Once again, were you asked to create the same separate angle, if you will, or separate perspective about what would be the north of Mr. Avery's property? Yes, if I move our focal point, if you will, to this particular location that is being shown on the screen, we can gain yet another perspective showing the northern areas, if you will, the areas in front of Mr. Avery's residence. Can you show us, this is the top of page 33. What are we looking at here? What you are looking at is the view looking from the north to the southwest, and we see Mr. Avery's residence here and the garage that we looked at previously. Up from the main portion of the image, we are seeing a Dodge Caravan, and there was also a burn barrel positioned over here. Finally, Trooper Austin, were you asked to provide some additional measurements in this quadrant or this area of the property? Yes, I was asked to provide some measurements to gain an understanding of the distances here. What you are seeing in this view is that three-dimensional model, but we are looking straight down on it. Again, the original view is very similar to the two-dimensional drawings we saw previously. But this helps us to better show the measurements, and the measurements that we have in here also is the distance from the main entrance of Mr. Avery's residence to the burn barrel. That is approximately 106 feet, and the measurements taken from the burn area behind the garage to some burn barrels behind the Janda Dassey residence were a distance of about 236 feet. It's your understanding, or at least your directions, came from the prosecution to explain or to indicate those measurements for the jury on this diagram. Is that correct? Yes, that's correct. The last area of inquiry, Mr. Austin, has to do with skeletal models. Although they are clearly not within your area of expertise and you will not be testifying about these models, Would you tell the jury at least what you were asked to do and how this may come into play later in this trial? I was asked to assist the forensic anthropologist, Dr. Leslie Eisenberg, in the creation of models of a human skeleton to help identify the location of various bones. Now, to accomplish this, I met with Dr. Eisenberg and worked with her directly under her supervision to create the models as to those bone locations. The initial skeletal model I obtained from the FBI in Quantico, Virginia. I took that model's texture, and as I said before, with the property, I made it look more of a bony texture, if you will, and under Dr. Eisenberg's supervision, again, I created various models showing that human skeleton, and I saw some of the bones on it. And at this point, plaintiff's exhibits 91 through 116 marked for identification. Trooper Austin, as I have asked you before, and with the witnesses that will come after you, that are going to be using your animation, or excuse me, your skeletal and scene models, have you been asked to create 4x6 prints of the models? Yes, I was asked to create that for most of the images that we saw on the PowerPoint, to create 4x6 prints of these renditions. Yes. The first image that I have for you is, I think, Exhibit 91. Is that correct? Yes, sir. And it goes through Exhibit 116. Yes, sir. Exhibit 91, if you can just take a moment, through Exhibit 116. Are those the scene model images, both being included in your PowerPoint and that you created as part of this total station project? Yes, sir. With the exception of, there are several aerial photographs that were utilized in my initial report that are shown here. Those are not scene models, they are photographs taken from aircraft. Those are actually identical to some that were already received from other law enforcement. Is that your understanding? Yes, sir. Mr. Kratz then says, I would move admission of Exhibits 91 through 116. Mr. Strang says no objection, and the court says those exhibits are admitted. And then Mr. Kratz continues. Then, Trooper Austin, we are going to move on to your animation. That is the culmination of all of these scene models. Tell the jury, please, how this animation was created. The intention here was to create an overview or a walkthrough of the scene from the models that we saw previously. Now, to create motion, what we have is a series of these images. In fact, it shows 30 of them per second to show or to make it appear as if we're moving through that scene. To create the animation that I believe we're about to see, over 5,250 pictures were brought together at 30 per second to move us through the location in question. I saved these and made a DVD, which was turned over to Mr. Kratz. At this point, Plaintiff's Exhibit 117 marked for identification. What we are going to show then, Trooper Austin, is Exhibit number 117, which I believe is the animation that you are referring to. I would ask that during the presentation of this animation, that you not interrupt, that you remain silent, and I will ask you just a few follow-up questions after that. I understand. Mr. Kratz then says, if I may, Judge, the only thing left in my direct examination was the playing of the animation. And then it says in the transcript, the animation CD was attempted to be played, but the equipment did not work properly. Where have we heard this before? And the CD was not able to be shown. Mr. Kratz then says, it appears that it won't play on this laptop. With my apologies to Mr. Strang, if he could begin his cross-examination, then if I could play it at the end, I would appreciate that. Otherwise, I have no further questions of this witness. And the court says, Mr. Strang, are you in agreement with that procedure? Mr. Buting says, why are we playing the animation at all? And the court says, Mr. Kratz, is that something that the state intends to use later in the trial? So you need some foundation to get it accepted? Mr. Kratz then says, this is actually, Judge, to assist the jury in understanding the relationship of these objects. I did intend to play it now. If you want to take just a couple minutes for a break, we can certainly have that set up, and I can play it now. Mr. Strang then says, I don't mind starting my cross. I think we will see the animation later. We have had the foundation for it. I don't know that we need to play it now. I can begin my cross. Okay, is your brain spinning after all that talk about geodimeters theodolites, CAD diagrams, 3D modeling, etc., etc. Boy, you are not alone. Here's what you really need to know about this. Trooper Austin is with the Wisconsin State Patrol's Technical Reconstruction Unit. Basically, his job is to map out crash and crime scenes using this high-tech surveying equipment. Think of it like CSI meets, say, I don't know, civil engineering. In this case, he spent a full week, November 5th through the 12th, 2005, at the Avery salvage yard and surrounding properties. He used this system called a total station to take over 4,100 precise measurements. We're talking about distances between buildings, the location of Teresa Hallbach's RAV4, the car crusher, Steven Avery's house, his garage, his burn barrels, you name it. He took measurements, okay? He also created a bunch of two-dimensional diagrams and 3D models using software normally reserved for marine or jewelry design, go figure. These models then let them kind of fly through the scene virtually. You can zoom in and out and even remove roofs to show room layouts inside of buildings. And yes, Kratz had him make an animation like a virtual walkthrough that was supposed to tie all of this stuff together. But in true Kratz fashion, the tech failed in court again, and the CD wouldn't play. So much for the big reveal, right? Bottom line, the prosecution wanted the jury just to see how close or how far various key locations were from each other. This wasn't just about, these fancy for 2005 graphics. It was about building this argument based on these visuals, like where Teresa's car was, how close it was to Avery's garage, what the scene looked like from different perspectives. So the models, the pictures, the graphics, everything, all the measurements, they're in. The animation, not so much. Now I can begin my cross. And the court says very well. And the cross-examination is then done by one of the defense attorneys, Mr. Strang. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, sir. I will turn my mic on. How is that? All right. So on November 5th, you get to the Avery salvage yard, right? Yes, sir. And one of the first orders of business is to map the area around the Toyota RAV4. Yes. The first place we mapped was around the RAV4. All right. That involved taking the little prism and going up and putting that on or over certain objects around the Toyota? Yes, sir. Yes, that's correct. Did it also involve putting the little prism, sometimes sticking it in a certain area on the Toyota or over it directly? Over it directly, not directly on that particular item. Okay. And then somebody else stood somewhere else with the total station, as you call it, and it shined the little laser and bounced it back to the prism. Is that correct? Yes. And so this was a two-person process? Yes, it is a two-man operation. And you took a number of measurements around the Toyota? Yes. And objects around it? Yes. Then a number of measurements of the Toyota itself? The Toyota itself, we would have had 4 measurements. Just the 4 corners? No. When we map the location of vehicles, we utilize the position of the wheels. We can get data showing us later the exact size of a particular vehicle for axle 1 and axle 2. Okay, then what you do is you later give the computer some information about the model of the vehicle. No, I will look that up elsewhere to get the dimensions. I will use the dimensions to draw the vehicle. I don't tell the computer it's this particular vehicle and it draws it. I have to do a little research to get some information about it. Then the computer fills in a Toyota in effect. Either I draw that or I use an existing Toyota and specify which items to fill in. There is a lot more manual work than there is that the computer does by itself. All right, the point is, what you are doing here is, you have already said this, but let's explore it a little bit. There is no camera involved in any of this, correct? No. Not an old-fashioned camera or a digital camera? No camera. There are a couple of prisms and a laser? Yes. And you have a computer that calculates angles and distances? The total station does that. Then at your desktop, you probably have a laptop computer, something sort of like this, right? Yes, I use a computer. And you can open various files, and the computer allows you to add a color? Yes. And a texture? Yes. And to pick standard sorts of objects that might be included? Yes. Like a tree? Yes. Your computer even has a little file you can open up and pick the type of tree you want? That's correct. Whether it has leaves or does not have leaves? I can pick the global season? Yes. You can turn the sun on? That's correct, I can. You can turn the sun off? Yes. If you want to put the sun in the northern sky on November 5th or the northern hemisphere, you can do that? Yes, I could. You could put it in the eastern sky if that is where you felt like putting it? Yes. You could have the sun rise in the west if that was your choice on a given day. Is that correct? If it was my intention to change science, yes, I could move the sun. Okay. So what we've got here is a model, right? Yes, a three-dimensional model. Yes. Actually, it's a two-dimensional model, right? That looks three-dimensional by the use of perspective. Everything I saw was projected on this surface. Am I right? Well, the screen, yes, is two-dimensional. Right. The model itself looks three-dimensional by the use of perspective. Well, it's not a physical model like the cups here. I can't bring it into you. It's a computer model, but I'm drawing it in 3D space and assigning it to an X and Y axis. But I don't have a physical axis to give you. In that sense, it's not three-dimensional. It's two-dimensional, but by using the vanishing point and the principles of perspective, we can give it the illusion of three-dimensional space on a flat screen. It's difficult for me to follow you. We do our work in 3D, but you could say the same is true of photography, that photography is two-dimensional. Sure. If that is what you are saying, I will agree with you. When you say you do your work in 3 dimensions, you are not actually building a model in any event. I mean, that you didn't use something like this box for Barb Janda's trailer, I assume. No, it's not a physical stick-built model, if you will, or plastic model. It's a virtual computer environment. Okay, got it. Now, we are in the virtual environment. Let's go back to what you and I both agree is two-dimensional space, okay? We will go to what you call your orthogonal views. Got me? Sure, orthogonal. Looking straight down. In other words, yes. Orthogonal is a fancy $64 word for looking straight down at something? Yes, okay. Now, you told us early on and actually showed us a pretty slide of the areas that you did some orthogonal mapping, forensic mapping of. First, we had the Avery salvage property, right? Yes, okay. And then we had, let's do it this way. I'm just going to take the piece of paper from your report. I'm going to put it on this gizmo, then I will zoom it and using a viewing machine showing document on screen, okay? Now, that is hard to see, but down at the bottom, do you see that area, hunting camp? Yes. That was an area you said you also mapped? Yes. So there, you could give us an overhead view? Yes, sir. Okay. Now, there were some other areas that you also were asked to map back on November 5th through November 12th, 2005. Some other areas off the Avery property. True? There were specific evidentiary spots that were mapped using a completely different instrument and not by me, of those particular things that may have been of evidentiary value in surrounding quarries. Those were not done by me, but I have knowledge of that. That is, these maps were, mapping coordinates were provided to you, correct? I do have GPS coordinates for other items. Yes, I do. All right, let's back up. Probably half of our jury knows what GPS is. The other half doesn't. That is Global Positioning Satellite. That's correct. The other instrument uses a total station also, but that also utilizes a GPS Global Positioning Satellite system. Those were specific, I believe, 11 or 12 points out in the quarries identified by the search teams. And someone else did that mapping, I understand, using a different technology? Yes, sir, that is correct. Using actually satellites that have geosynchronized orbits. Is that correct? Yes. To use a fancy term that allows anybody who gets access to the system to know where you are by degrees of latitude and longitude down to a matter of seconds anywhere on the globe? Yes, that's correct, sir. All right. And the purpose of taking these GPS measurements was to provide them to you for your forensic mapping project? Yes. Should they become necessary later for mapping, we had it available to us if such was needed. I will show you figure 50 from your report, okay? I will put that up here. But first, I will just ask you, this is your figure 50? Yes. This is a page of your report labeled figure 50. You have seen it before? Yes. Indeed, you made it. Is that correct? Yes, sir, I did. All right. Now, that is up on the little gizmo called an Elmo. Tell us what you see. Tell us what you have in your figure 50. This is a map, I believe, from Microsoft Streets or maybe from Delorme Atlas. I would have to see what program I used. It shows the roads in the vicinity of the Avery property. What I have done here, I indicated with a red box the approximate location of the Avery salvage yard and the approximate location of Steven Avery's residence. There is also a reference to GPS coordinates, which I believe is for the surrounding quarry. Okay. And you put in a little red flag? Yes. What I did in this mapping program, I gave it the GPS coordinates and it gave me a little red flag that is seen on the screen in that particular location. Then, using Microsoft Word, I generated my report. I labeled that flag as being those particular GPS coordinates. Okay. You gave the jury a little lesson before about degrees, minutes, and seconds. If I read the coordinates that you have given us here, or not given by you, but which were included here, we have longitudinal 44 degrees north, right? Yes. In the northern hemisphere, right? Yes. And 14 minutes right? Yes. And 51 seconds? Yes, sir. And a latitude of 87 degrees west? Yes, sir. West of the Greenwich Mean Line? That is my understanding, sir. 41 minutes and 51 seconds? Yes, sir. Okay. And you got only one of these areas, but did I understand you that you actually were provided 11 or 12 specific GPS sites, GPS coordinates outside of the Avery salvage yard property? This one that you are showing is not one of the ones that was provided to me by the GPS mapping team. This is one that was provided to me when I was working with Dr. Eisenberg. So I don't want any confusion or to imply or suggest to you this is from the team that used the GPS total station. Okay, thank you. I didn't understand that. Didn't want any confusion either. So this is one you got from or with Dr. Eisenberg? Yes. But there were 11 or 12 other GPS coordinates? From that other team, yes. When the search teams located things they thought could be something, those were indicated to me. Something of interest? Yes. Okay. Do you have any way of knowing, as you sit here today, what the distance is from the red flag site or the site represented by the red flag here to either the salvage yard or Mr. Avery's residence? I do not, but if you would like me to, I can certainly figure it out for you. I bet you can. If anything, I bet you can. Is that a lot of trouble? No, if you want to bring me back later, I can certainly give you that number. I don't know if I will or not, but do you have a sense at all, as of now, just ballparking? No, I don't. I wouldn't feel comfortable. Okay, fine. North is up in this figure? Yes, sir. Okay. So the flag looks like it is southwest, essentially, of the Avery salvage property? Yes. Now, let's go back to what we are calling the three-dimensional or perspective images that give us the illusion of depth and height and width, okay? The virtual environment of 3 dimensions on those, you couldn't possibly map with your total station and its prism stick. Every little item that a photograph might pick up, correct? No, sir. It's just a matter, I guess you could possibly, but there it becomes an issue of time and manpower resources, right? Yes, I agree. And how did the decision get made on what things to map and what not to map? I can give you a particular location in reference to the garage, for example. I really didn't have guidance. With the garage, I picked, or at least I wrote in my report, a page of the larger items that were there. In terms of the interior of the house, I was told main pieces of furniture, bed, dresser, desk, that type of thing. And once you have mapped them, things can be taken out, so to speak, just phew, out of the computer model. Yes, they can be hidden or, as I said, turned off, so we no longer see it in that model. You gave one example of the air compressor in the garage. Do you remember that? Yes. The thing is, Mr. Strang, there are layers over objects, separate layers. We can essentially turn off one layer so we don't see it in our model. That was done in the garage with the air compressor, the Suzuki Samurai, and the snowmobile. Okay. Now it's here, now it's not. That is a matter of a few strokes or clicks of a mouse. Yes, for you, I think I have it. Who gives you directions as to what actual items that were present should be included in the model and what are not? Guidance was given from the lead team of investigators for the prosecution. They wanted the compressor out, so you took it out? Yes. They wanted the Samurai in, so you left the Samurai in? Yes. Okay. Now I will show you a photograph. I don't think that we have seen this before. I will ask if you recognize it. It's very possible that I may have taken this photograph. This appears to be the southeastern area of the salvage yard, the location where the RAV4 was located. It appears that is either in the process of covering or uncovering it with the large blue tarp. Very good. Whether you took it or not, you recognize the photograph? Yes. There is a good old-fashioned photograph. This photo? Yes. Mr. Strang then says, I will mark this as an exhibit. And exhibit 118 is marked for identification. Mr. Strang then continues, it's now exhibit 118. I would like to let the jury see it, okay? And that is the tarp over the Toyota RAV4. Yes, that is my recollection that night, that the vehicle was covered. So what we are seeing under the blue tarp is the car right where it was when you arrived on November 5th. Yes. And are we looking generally toward the car crusher or from the car crusher? In this position, sir, we are looking to the west. The car crusher would be off to our right and perhaps slightly behind us to the northeast. Okay. So the car crusher is back off this way. If we are standing here snapping the picture back off behind us? No, it would be more to our right. If we are looking straight at the photograph, as we are looking straight to the west, it's not far to the right, just slightly behind. That is the direction the crusher would be. All right. What we would see is there is a whole lot of trees, it looks like, and underbrush and that kind of thing that extends along this line of cars. Yes, there are some smaller, if you will, trees kind of along the other side of the pond. The pond would be off to our right also. Okay. We are up on a ridge, if you will, above the pond. Yes, the pond is pretty set down pretty low, so we're higher in elevation than the pond. There is actually sort of a berm here behind to the left of the Toyota and that line of cars. Is that correct? Yes, you can actually see that in the photograph there. I'm just pointing to the berm. Over on the opposite side of this begins some of the quarry-type property. To the south of the Avery property? Yes, south would be to our left in this particular image. All right. So when, for example, you mapped the area around the Toyota and the car crusher in this southeastern corner of the property and created models of it, you simply omitted most or all of the trees that we see in the photographs of the area. I actually, perhaps, I don't want to be a stickler on verbiage. I didn't create models. We have the two-dimensional orthogonal diagrams, but models, usually refers to the three-dimensional model for which we use the prism of the total station to essentially trace the exterior of the tree line. So each individual tree was not collected, but we do see on the two-dimensional view just what that width would be as far as we can go to the trees. Okay, I think you essentially outlined the area where there would be trees. Correct. Just to better explain that, if I may, if the walls on the sides of the courtroom were the trees, I would probably take a point in the back and a point in the front just to show that is the tree line as opposed to every individual tree. And where you did that, let's see, we are looking at one of your orthogonal views of the rear area we have been discussing. Yes, all right. What you have shown us is some representation of the trees to the south. Yes, that is the best way to describe the squiggly line that you just referred to. That would have been taken along that south tree line that you are referring to now. If you look just north of that, there is another squiggly line that is tougher to see. This image right here that I'm referring to, right, that would be the edge of the other trees there. It's very faint, but you are saying you provided some line indicating there were trees along there? Yes. It might be better if I had the color version of this. The ground, if you will, I believe is two separate colors here, which helps us to observe that difference. But that is how the mapping was done. Also on the eastern side here along the tree line. That is another tall berm there. But if one were standing on the crusher in the spot where the arrow comes down, you would get the impression from this orthogonal diagram. You may be able to see straight to, or at least the car that seems to intersect the line of sight in front of the Toyota. This would look like a line of sight on your drawing, correct? That was not my intention at all, Mr. Strang. I just wanted to show the distance from the RAV4 to the crusher. Absolutely. I understand that was not your intention. I understand. In fact, my point is, this would not represent the line of sight, correct? No, I don't. I would have to go back and look at the other photographs to see how thick the tree line is. I don't want to infer that I could see that RAV4 from the crusher, which is 380 feet. There are smaller trees that you would have to look through. I just don't know. So there was no way to know because really, other than showing a squiggly line, you left out the trees and underbrush and anything else in the way? That's correct, I did. Okay. Was this the only car, if you will, on the north side of that line or near the north tree line? Based on looking at the diagram, it appears that it was. I would like to go back and review the photographs, but I don't recall leaving out any vehicles on here that were specifically mapped. Just to point out these areas over here, these are all of the vehicles over here. Obviously, we didn't map any of those. We just traced around that row of cars. But down in this area, I believe I mapped out the location of all of the vehicles here, except where you see where we have this pattern again. Blank spots, so to speak? Yeah, they appear to be blank here. Again, I'm not a witness. I don't have a perfect memory. I am not just saying I think you left any cars out. I don't think you did either. But I just wondered if you had a recollection, if that was, in fact, the only car on the north side of that little lane. I can't, just looking at the drawing, I would say it was the only car right there. Okay. I would feel more comfortable referring to some of the photographs, but I believe that is it. Mr. Buting just indicated there appears to be a second car kind of hidden by the label of the RAV4. Yes, there is. Okay, all right. If we were going to get a real line of sight, we would really want to use photographs, not something that you and your computer generated. If we wanted to look at this and say, could you see the RAV4 from the crusher? No, this right now in this form is probably not the best medium to use. If you wanted to see what is the distance, that is why I had it here. As the crow flies, right. I will not pester Mr. Kratz to go back to the PowerPoint presentation, but I will just use my black and white copy of the sheet that you folks provided me. What page are you on, sir? 27 at the bottom. And the court says, Mr. Strang, just for break purposes, do you know how much time you have left? Mr. Strang says, 5 minutes, something like that. And the court says, Mr. Kratz, what about the state? Mr. Kratz says, my presentation is about 1.5 minutes, Judge. And the court says, all right. Members of the jury, after we are done with this portion of the proceedings today, we are going to let you go early. That's why I kept it going. But if you want a break now, you can have a break now. And the jury responds, no. And the court then says, I see heads nodding, no. So we will plunge ahead. All right, Mr. Strang. And then Mr. Strang continues. All right. Our jury has already seen a slide of this, that garage, sort of, right? Yes, this is my model of the garage. And what you have done for us is help us make believe that the garage had no roof. I don't like the words make believe, but yes, the roof was removed so we could see inside the garage. Then we can also see it as if we were hovering 20 or 30 feet up, something like that, whatever this is. Yes. Taller than any of us? Yes. Okay. And this is a pretty clean looking garage, the model. Is that correct? Yes. You have got a view of a John Deere tractor? Yes, it is. And it's a vivid electric green in color. Is that correct? Yes. But if people look at the garage, the John Deere tractor is there. If we look at an actual picture of the garage, we see the John Deere tractor? Yes. With some other things, right? Yes. A whole lot of clutter? Yes. A snowmobile is in there. There is a table with the items in the back. I know we are seeing a lot more clutter in the actual scene or the photograph than we have seen in the model, but we have two different purposes for this too. Okay. Is this thing down here the seat and then the windscreen of one of these snowmobiles? Yes. Does the photograph show the garage as you actually saw it the week of November 5th to November 12th? Yes, it does. And how about this? Does that take us to the other side of the garage, the east side of the garage? Yes, that shows the east wall of the garage. We see a snowmobile, some tables. There is a freezer back over here too. That is how I recall the garage. There is a snowmobile under there somewhere? Yeah. Do you see this green stripe here? That is the windscreen that you saw on the other one. Okay. What is the gray thing on the right side of the photo? Are you referring to this here, sir? Yes. That is the Suzuki Samurai. All right. That is the garage as it actually looked to you November 5th through November 12th? Yes, that is how I recall the garage. Let's look at the south wall of the garage, or part of the south wall. That is how it looked to you November 5th through November 12th? Yes, it does. Again, I see a tool chest, the air compressor we talked about before. There is a weeder with a waste basket. That definitely fits my recollection of the garage. So if you use the laser pointer, the air compressor is gone. It's this green item down here near the center of the photograph. That thing that you took out of the photo is the little evidence tent that said 23A. Yes, I did. Now the photograph, actually, you can see pretty well under the compressor in the photograph, can't you? Yes. That is one of the few places in the garage that appears not to be cluttered. With the exception we cannot see behind the wheel, I can see some flooring under it from this view. And Mr. Strang then says, all right, I'm going to mark the photographs that you have just shown us, and then I'm done. Exhibits 119 through 121 marked for identification. And Mr. Strang continues, okay, real quick, just so the record is clear, I'm doing them in the same order I just showed them to you. Exhibit 119 has the John Deere tractor in it. Is that correct? Yes, it does. Exhibit 120 is the side of the garage with the snowmobile that you pointed out and part of the gray Samurai? Yes. And Exhibit 121 is the south part, the south wall of the garage with the air compressor? Yes, sir. Mr. Strang says, okay, I move the exhibits that have been offered with Mr. Austin, Your Honor, and that's all I have. And the court says, any objection to the exhibits? Mr. Kratz says, no. And the court says, very well, the exhibits are admitted. Mr. Kratz? At which time, Mr. Kratz made an attempt to show the video presentation to the jury again, but it was not successful. Mr. Kratz then says, "Judge, we seem destined to not have this work today. We will put it in through another witness. I will have this animation marked, however, and if it is received without objection, then I have no further questions of this witness. Thank you." And the court says, "All right, Mr. Strang." Mr. Strang says, "That's fine. We can mark it, and I think it can be received for purposes of today." And the court says, "Very well. The court will order it received, but not admitted. Is that it, counsel?" Mr. Strang says, "Yes, I think for now." And then the court excuses the jury and lets them go home for the day. Okay, so after Trooper Austin gave the prosecution this slick tech demo on his 3D scene modeling, it was the defense's turn. And this is where things get interesting. Dean Strang, one of Steven's defense attorneys, he doesn't go far or go for the science like head on. He doesn't have him use all these technological terms that are going to confuse the jury. Instead, he does what good defense lawyers do. He pokes at the credibility, at the process, and at the fanciness, I guess you could say, that the prosecution is trying to throw at the jury. But here's what he gets at. First, he confirms the basics. Yes, Trooper Austin was one of the first people to map the scene around Teresa Halbach's RAV4. He used that total station tool, which is a two-person operation. One person places a prism near an object, and the other one operates the machine to measure the angles and the distances. But here's where he starts to kind of peel it back. Okay, he points out there are no cameras involved in this mapping, no actual photos, just measurements and models. And these models, they aren't generated automatically. Trooper Austin has to manually build them. He has to look up vehicle dimensions and add in colors and textures, and can even pick what season it is or move the sun across the sky if he wants. That's not science. That's, custom animation. Strang then makes the point loud and clear that this is a virtual environment. This is not real. It's not a photograph. It's a man-made interpretation based on selective data. And that selection of that data is partly driven by, wait for it, the prosecution. So, yep, the prosecution pretty much told Trooper Austin which items to leave in and which to leave out. Like the snowmobile, leave it in. That big old air compressor that might be blocking something, ooh, take that out. One click and, poof, gone from the model. Very convenient, right? Strang also points out that while this model does give the illusion of 3D, it's all being projected onto a flat screen so that when the jurors see these views, they're seeing an interpretation. It's not a representation of reality. And then he hits on visibility. Could someone actually see the RAV4 from the car crusher? The model or this graphic that was created kind of implies that it's just a straight line of sight. There's nothing in the way. But in real life, there were trees, there were berms, there was brush, there were elevation changes. And Trooper Austin admits that he didn't map every tree, and he can't say for sure whether the car was visible from that distance or not. That's kind of a big deal. Because if you remember, if you go all the way back, or all the way, it feels like a long ways back. If you go back to Pam and Nicole Sturm, who discovered the car, right? They said they were down by the car crusher, keeping their eyes on this car crusher for over 2 hours to make sure, or sorry, not the car crusher, on Teresa's Toyota, making sure that nobody touched it or got into it or anything. You can't say for sure that they had actually a direct line of sight from the car crusher where they said they were standing to Teresa's vehicle to actually see whether or not somebody actually touched the car, right? Then we get into the garage, Avery's garage, and the defense shows actual photographs taken during the investigation and then compares them to these computer graphics that the jury actually saw. There's a huge difference in this. The real garage is a cluttered mess. I mean, there's snowmobiles, there's tools, there's machines, there's piles of stuff everywhere. The model looks clean and very minimal. Trooper Austin admits that certain clutter was intentionally removed for clarity, again, at the prosecution's request. So, what the defense is doing here is pretty much just casting doubt, not on the visuals, but on the intention behind them. They're showing that these glossy, high tech, again, 2005 models are filtered, they're built under the prosecution's direction. And what isn't included might be just as important as what is. So, in short, yeah, the model is helpful, but it's not comprehensive. It's definitely not reality. And then after the jury has left, everyone else remains in the courtroom and there's more discussion. The court says, "You may be seated. Counsel, is there anything to put on the record before we conclude today?" And Mr. Strang says, "What exhibit number did you give the animation?" Mr. Kratz says, "The animation was exhibit 117. Judge, we did offer that, but the PowerPoint itself, although the hard copy was previously marked, I alerted the court that I was going to ask that the actual disc be received. For purposes of the record, that is exhibit 122, and I will offer that at this time." The court says, "Are there any exhibits that either party may move admission for that we should address at this time?" And Mr. Kratz says, "I have moved all of them, Judge. I think they have been authenticated and identified." Mr. Strang says, "I think we have addressed all of them. I know I moved exhibits 118 through 121, and those were admitted. My notes suggest that Mr. Kratz has moved his exhibits, and the court has ruled on everything that he discussed or has shown today." Mr. Fallon, part of the prosecution attorneys, says, "Can I ask the clerk what exhibit 90 was?" And the clerk reports back, "Is this on the record? I don't know who is speaking right now." Mr. Kratz says, "That's Mr. Fallon." The reporter says, "Okay, thank you." The clerk says, "Mr. Austin's report is exhibit 90 and the PowerPoint is exhibit 122. Mr. Fallon says, "Okay." And the court says, "Mr. Kratz, has the state moved admission of the animation disc?" Mr. Kratz says, "Yes." And the court says, "I think that was viewed in the motion hearing before we started. Does the defense agree that can be admitted? That was the thing they didn't get to work today, but I believe it previously has been shown in court as part of a motion hearing." And Mr. Strang says, "Right. That is exhibit 117. It was offered and received. I don't think that it was admitted yet because nobody identified it or had seen it. Isn't that exhibit 117? Mr. Kratz says, "Yes." The court says, "I take it authentication is not going to be a problem, so it will be admitted when it is viewed in front of the jury." Mr. Strang says, "Right." And the court says, "All right. Very well. Anything else today? If not, I would like to see counsel for just a couple minutes in chambers before you leave." And then at this point, proceedings are concluded for the day. All right, so let's close out this really long, again, another long episode. After we had Bobby Dassey's testimony in the previous episode, this entire afternoon in court kind of became this tug of war between the prosecution and the defense. On one side, the state brought in Trooper Austin and his forensics, I guess is what you could call it, his technological forensics. He walked this jury through this high-tech mapping and, the not so functioning animation. Uh, the prosecution wanted the jury to see the distances, the layout, the proximity of key locations like the RAV4, the car crusher, Steven Avery's garage. It was impressive, I guess, but also very tightly controlled because the prosecution was controlling what the jury was seeing. Then the defense came in and they weren't buying all of this stuff. The defense called out the models for what they were, kind of man-made interpretations built by hand based on data that the prosecution wanted Trooper Austin to show. He pointed out what wasn't in the models, the clutter, the trees. I know we just went over this not too long ago. But he also reminded the jury that what they're seeing isn't real, right? This whole episode was pretty much a battle over what the jury sees and, more importantly, what they don't see. Next time, we're getting back to in the next episode, the real bombshell, because Bobby Dassey is coming back. And the defense finally gets their turn to cross-examine him. I really hope that this ends up being as entertaining as I hope it will be. Again, I've not read these. I don't know what's in them. I'm just kind of waiting along with you in the next episode. Until then, thank you. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate all of you. We'll talk soon. Bye for now.